Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Happy voting day. Happy fall weather. It's a lot going on. It's a busy time of year, especially in the nonprofit world. And so we are very much appreciative of you taking your time today to join us for our webinar, Preparing Your Nonprofit for the Future, Using Comprehensive Philanthropy. I'm Nick Centineo, Senior Investment Consultant and Endowment Foundation Team Lead with Manning & Peer, and I'm very pleased to be your moderator. I think we have some great content for you today because this topic stems from a very common question that we get from our clients, and that is, what does the future look like for philanthropy, and what can our organization do to manage that future? Change is constant, but it seems like of all the changes we've experienced over the last few years, we may be entering sort of a new era for many nonprofits. And if you've approached things like your annual giving, your major giving, campaigns, your endowment, if you continue to approach all these things in the same way that you always have, you may be missing out on trends that could be highly beneficial to your organization, or maybe just exposing yourself to risks that you don't need to take. So that's why we're here today. Luckily, we have an expert with us on all these topics who has created her own firm, the George Philanthropy Group, to focus on high-impact, comprehensive philanthropy. It's a concept we'll define more in a minute. And so I'm very pleased to welcome with us Meg George as our guest today. So Meg, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'm excited to be here.
Meg is the co-founder and president of George Philanthropy Group. She and her team advise nonprofits on major gift programs and planning for and executing on on campaign initiatives. They also serve as advisors to families on how to make their giving impactful and meaningful. And then she has a children's book coming out, What's Philanthropy to Philomena, which launches on November 15th with the goal of sharing the power and joy of generosity to people of all ages. Just in time for Christmas. So my kids would love that. Great idea. So again, I think today's topic is really is timely, based on questions we've gotten from the field from nonprofits, but it's also timeless, in the sense that the solutions that we'll be discussing today, they can set you up with a long-term mindset, I think, for how to connect with donors and tailored to the specifics of your organization. And so really on the agenda today, we'll talk about the evolution of charitable giving and trends in 2023. We'll talk about what it means to support your organization with a comprehensive campaign and how to implement that. And then we'll also leave plenty of time for questions and answers from you, the audience, including any questions that were pre-submitted when you signed up. If you would like to ask a question, please use Zoom's question box so we'll see it. And when we conclude today's prepared remarks, we'll spend any remaining time answering questions that have been submitted. And if we run short on time or are unable to answer your question, we'll personally follow up with you after the webinar. Okay, so Meg, welcome again, and thank you. I think it's always helpful to maybe form a baseline of understanding and background. So to start, can you walk us through some of the key terms that you think everyone should know, and then give us sort of a state of giving snapshot on where things stand today and trends that you're seeing within your group?
Yep. I think this is really helpful to get us all on the same page so that the language I use feels like it resonates and makes sense. So today, if I'm talking about unrestricted giving, I'm referencing the gifts that come to your organization in a really flexible way. And those are the gifts that we can use for anything that we need to meet our operating budget and respond to our greatest needs at any given time. Restricted gifts are still cash or current use gifts, but they are restricted in writing to a specific program, a space, or certainly to be put into the endowment. The annual fund references a group of money. We often hear about this, I think, primarily in education. We use that terminology a lot. but it references a pool of money that comes in for current use. It's money that we're going to use in that fiscal year. And it's primarily unrestricted dollars, but it also includes dollars that might be restricted and they still help us meet our operating budget. In academics, that might look like someone allocating $1,000 just to a science program. And if the budget was $5,000, that's relieving and that counts towards the annual fund goal. Prospects are prospective donors to an organization. Donors are current supporters, but during the time of a campaign, you might have a donor who gives to you on an annual basis towards your annual fund or your unrestricted giving accounts, and they become a prospect for your campaign initiative. So we might dual title some people today. Planned giving are the commitments that are going to be fulfilled later in life, but planned for now and documented in writing, a deferred gift. Endowed gifts go into an endowment, a pool of money that is not touched. So the principal sits there while the interest is generated, and most nonprofits have adopted a spend policy. Maybe about 4.5% or 5% of that principal, the interest kicked off, is spendable annually. Some organizations rely on that money in order to meet their annual operating budget, while others kick it back into their endowment to let that fund grow. And we're going to talk a lot today about campaigns. So when I use that word, I do not mean a employee giving day, an annual fund campaign, or a marketing campaign. I'm talking about an initiative that is more comprehensive in nature. We so often refer to campaigns in this industry as capital campaigns, which once referenced capital spaces and now I think references capital money. But campaigns are just more comprehensive in nature, ideally at this point, and they are going to have a start date and an end date with a monetary goal and a specific allocation of where the funds will go. They often span a time period of maybe 3 years on average. So when we talk about campaigns today, we're talking about one of these bigger, more significant initiatives. Last year in America, $499 billion was given away, and most of it came from individuals. That has always been the trend. We've always seen about 70% on average of money that's given away come from people. And we can take a look here at foundations who are kind of falling second in line. And we know that we're experiencing this kind of transfer of wealth right now. And we've seen a lot of families choose to park some of their philanthropic assets into a private family foundation. So I always point that out because even though individuals are the backbone of charity in our country, they also really are the people behind the foundations for the most part too. So whenever we're thinking about asking for gifts, I want us to think about the people. We're soliciting gifts from other people. And there's a misconception when one enters the field of fundraising that he or she must get really tight with all of the businesses and corporations nearby and nationally as quickly as possible. But you can see here from the stats that it's not always the best use of time. So about 6% of money that's given away in our country comes from corporations. And we're going to very much focus on the relationships that lead us to individuals who have dipped a little bit, if you read any philanthropy news in these statistics, from about 70% down to about 64%, but the dollars are steady. So we're going to talk about why that is in the next couple of slides. I wanted everyone to get the chance to see where money typically goes. Religion has always had a really tight kind of grip on the first spot here. So typically around 30% of money is allocated to religious entities. And if you take states like Utah, you can see how in some regions in our country, philanthropy is so deeply tied almost primarily to religious institutions that it can also really affect the numbers nationally. Education had the second place spot for a long time, as far as I can remember looking back. And right after COVID here, human services kind of bumped them down. And a few things happened. One is that people started on this trend that we call hyper local giving, where they took a real focus on their community and said, what do I have to do to make sure that people's lives are okay here? And during this really awful and challenging time, is everyone getting the services that they need to survive? And so there was an influx of gifts into human service organizations. And around this same kind of time, people started to say, do I trust everything that happens at institutions, including education institutions? You hear and see about in the news different goings on at universities, colleges, private day schools. Those are philanthropic entities. But when there's caution around trust, it very much impacts philanthropic activity. So I think that's a couple of things we can point to. But you can see a snapshot here that international giving too has increased really significantly. So I think that's another kind of noteworthy trend and something we'll keep an eye on going into 2024. At the end of the day, let's summarize what I would say are the most noteworthy trends for any fundraising and nonprofit professional to really take a look at and focus on. Mega gifts are making up about 5% of all of the money that's given away from individuals. Those are gifts of $500 million or greater. That is an astronomical amount of money that is coming from really big gifts. Many of us can't even imagine asking for 1, 5, 50 million, let alone $500 million. So what this shows us is that even though the percentage of donors is down a little bit, the dollars are steady because fewer people are giving bigger and bigger gifts. We have this really significant reliance on that very top of the wealth pyramid and the donor pyramid here in our country. And we'll talk about that a little bit throughout today's session. So the middle class is getting pinched, has been for the last few years. Inflation really matters when it comes to charitable giving. In 2000, about 2/3 of households were philanthropic, and now about half of households are philanthropic. There's also 5 different generations of people who are being asked for gifts. So millennials versus the greatest generation versus Z and baby boomers. Some people want a sheet of paper. Some people want an Instagram ad. It's nearly impossible to capture a whole lot of donors right now with just one activity or in one foul swoop. So I hope, if anything, that takes some of the pressure off of you around trying to increase gifts through the more broad-based efforts. Participation numbers are great to increase, but it's really challenging right now to capture those people who kind of sit at the bottom in the middle of our giving pyramids. I will also make a point to mention that of high net worth households, about 90% of those are philanthropic. So it just continues to emphasize this high reliance that we have on the people who have the most significant assets. Next gen donors are really interesting, coming up in a lot of conversations around philanthropy. They fall into a couple of categories here. We can see the people whose parents and grandparents may have left a bit of a legacy in our city or in our communities. We know who those notable families are, and it's usually kind of a long game approach for them. You might feel a little disappointed by a noteworthy family's gift of $2,000 if you've seen much greater gifts from the parent or the grandparents' generation. But the truth is that rising professionals or next gen don't always have their fingers on the purse strings yet. And when we can steward them in the same way that we stewarded their parents, grandparents, the generations and family members before them, we're really getting into their fold, their philanthropic fold and their philanthropy family as they think about their future and more of this marathon rather than sprint kind of approach with their giving. On the other side, we see people who might be coming into wealth for the very first time in their lives. And these people are rising professionally, and we know that they have the capacity to make big gifts to us. They don't need to be stewarded in the same ways as legacy and more sophisticated philanthropic families do. These people are entrepreneurs. They probably have made their money more quickly. They think about visions differently, and they've taken some risks in their life, which means they'll do the same with their philanthropy. So when we get a sense of how the rising professionals, the next generation of philanthropists, have come into their money, we can also get a sense of how they might give it away. So we want to be mindful of people who really respect and appreciate a more formal, long-term approach, because when they have those private family foundations or assets in their purview, that's when you'll see bigger gifts. And then you also want to be conscious of the time that people want to spend thinking about a gift if they're used to coming into and spending money a little bit more quickly. And last but not least, we know that problems are multifaceted, meaning that communities don't just have one simple problem that can be solved by putting money into it anymore. I use schools often as an example because years ago, someone could call me and say, hey, Meg, George, would you give a gift of $500? Our students really need books. Now they might say, hey, Meg, George, our kids really need to get to school and we're having a hard time recruiting a bus driver. And when they get here, they're hungry. And then they need the books, but not just books. They need laptops to work on and iPads to bring home. Oh, and an after school program. So you see, problems have a domino effect, I think, in our communities. And we look at people like Mackenzie Scott, right? Who is just this unbelievable philanthropist who's really made big splashes and waves in philanthropy. And I think part of the question she may have been asking, I don't know her, but I presume this based on her trends, is, hey, if we take a place like a United Way, this public society benefit organization, as it's labeled in this sector, do they have a better handle on all of these multi-dimensional problems that we see in communities? Challenges feel so complicated, right? So I think it's worth noting and paying attention to that philanthropists are really curious if they can solve multiple problems at once. And the organizations who present themselves as people who are savvy around the different challenges that their communities face will be the ones who can make a more sophisticated solicitation because they can prove how they can affect this multi-dimensional challenges that we're aware of.
Meg, so if we have all these changes happening in the world of philanthropy, I don't think it's probably not a far leap to say that organizations need to rethink their fundraising program in certain ways, right? Maybe take a fresh look at everything in light of these trends. But Megan, in speaking before, I know you've advocated for a comprehensive campaign as one, I'll call the tool for organizations to use to do this. So I guess the question is, what is a comprehensive campaign and how does it help nonprofits today?
A campaign is defined by a project or an initiative that has a start date and an end date with a specific monetary goal and an allocation for support. So campaigns are really these vehicles that we use to actually fund the priorities that we have. And like I said, years ago, I think everyone was going into a capital campaign. And then donors got savvy and they said, well, wait a second. I gave you all of this money for this new space, and maybe one of a few things have happened at different institutions. It looks half empty, or now I see you can't meet your operating budget because the space is huge and it's expensive, or great that you have a beautiful space, but what about the future? Have you thought about starting an endowment so that we know you can be really sustainable? So there's this ideal three-legged stool in campaigning that affects people, it affects space, and it affects future. And all of that is to say that when we are visioning and when we are prioritizing things, we need to think about who the people are that we need to support. Are they the people who work for us and carry out services? Are they our guests or the people who benefit from what we do? And we need to think about the space that they're in. Is it adequate? Is it efficient? Is it effective? And we need to think about the future. And I'm just going to say that the future right now feels very synonymous with endowment. There was a major misconception for a long time that only educational organizations should really be building and growing endowments, and that's just not true. Every nonprofit should establish and strive to grow as healthy of an endowment as possible. We're always on this tightrope in fundraising. It's like, how can I show people that I'm doing really well, but I can't do it without them? How can I show people that I need them right now, but I'm going to need them in the future too? I'm trying to balance meeting my current needs and being responsible and thinking about the future. So when we think about the word comprehensive, we think about counting all of the gifts that come in during a period of time, which means that even the gifts that come in for one's annual fund during your annual appeal in an unrestricted way would actually count towards a campaign. Most organizations are doing that now. So just on a practical level, it kind of keeps you competitive on the fundraising landscape to say, hey, I'm raising the same kind of money you are because we're counting it all. And it also does another thing. It shows our donors that we're really mindful about a sustainable approach, not just to the next couple of years, but to the years well beyond that too. So when we go to somebody with a comprehensive campaign, we're actually saying to them, hey, we were really thoughtful here about our vision, and we're trying to articulate our priorities and what we know that we need most now and in the future. And we're trying to just ask for one gift so that we can thank you more than ask you. So how does a campaign help your organization? It really organizes your vision in a very celebratory way that also creates a sense of urgency. And I like to tell my clients, gone are the days where campaigns have to be extremely expensive, so time consuming, way too much of a lift. We're now in the days where donors are not going to consider jumping from a $2,500 gift to a $25,000 gift in a couple of years' time unless you are in a campaign, because they want to know that there's a formal professional approach to boxing up what you know you want and need to do and articulating it in a really great and exciting kind of visionary way. So campaigns make it possible for us to solicit even bigger gifts, and it gives us access to new relationships with people who might actually consider investing in our plan if we weren't really hooking them with just our kind of annual, more broad-based appeals.
Well, one question we get a lot, especially in terms of endowed giving, which I think you've mentioned before as a component of a comprehensive campaign. How do we actually fine-tune our case for support based on the type of organization we have, or type of organization we are? So, for example, a school is very different, has a very different profile from a food bank.
Exactly.
In terms of why people give, in terms of is an endowment expected, is a major gift useful, et cetera, et cetera. So, Meg, how do you tailor that case statement to each different type of organization?
Okay, so a case for support is the document that is sort of like our guiding light through a campaign initiative. And it does a few things. I'm going to list them out. So if you're thinking about starting to draft a case for support, here's how I would do it. I would say who I am, what my organization is, what we do, and about how much that costs. So I would set the scene for donors to say, this is who we are, it's what we do, and it costs us about this much. Then I would transition into saying, this is what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. This is about how much that would cost to do that. And this is what the outcomes of that are. So I went from setting the stage to saying, here's where we're going. Here's why we're going to head in that direction. It's going to cost us about this much money. That's the campaign goal that we're testing. And here's what the outcomes are. So of utmost importance to prospective campaign donors is the impact they will have, the outcomes that they will help drive. Our case for support needs to absolutely hit home how much something's going to cost and what the outcomes will be. And it also needs to provide context around why we got there. My husband, Phil, and I are partners. We lead our firm together, and we worked on a feasibility study, which I'm going to call a campaign planning assessment, because those are even far more comprehensive in nature at this point. We're going to talk about them today. And they had already written the case for support when we got there. And we really like to be a part of helping to write the case for support and keep it as a fluid document. And this is why. The first 10 interviews that we went to on this organization's behalf all said, we do not want to give money to this. You must not have heard about A and B, or maybe you haven't yet spoken to so-and-so. But people were so strongly adamant against supporting the things that this organization had written. It just didn't have the context around why or how they got there. So more important than what you even write down is what you do with a case for support. And engaging people, giving people a seat at the table to actually be a part of finalizing that document is the number one most important thing that you can do. So when we're very intentional in saying to people, this is a fluid document and I want your reaction, we're inviting them into the conversation, which will probably really benefit us. Not only because we're around smart, successful people whose opinions could only really in most cases make us better, but also because they're now getting invested in what we're doing. So when we think about soliciting transformational support, major in principle gifts, it starts at the case for support. And what we're fine tuning there is not only what our organization needs from multiple perspectives. No more than 3 is really ideal. But if you kind of think about your case into buckets, ask yourself if you're hitting on the idea of people, space, and future to the extent that you can. It's that perfect 3-legged stool. And any organization can fine tune in that way. Of course, unless you're an animal organization, by all means, sub out people for animals and so on. But donors want to see that you've actually thought about why these things are important, how much they're going to cost, and what the outcomes of funding them will be. And then they want to be invited to react to that. And that's the best thing that you can do. Cases for support need to be very clear and concise. I am a really big fan of transitioning away from 5 pages of Times New Roman size 12 into 6 slides that incorporate some graphics and some color and maybe even photos of the people or things that benefit from your organization, and taking people through it that way. A case for support needs to be something that people finish and want to think on for a minute. They don't finish and say, well, wait a second, I don't really even completely understand who you are, or I don't even really know how much money this is compared to how much it costs you to do something anyway. So, it's like the mom test. It's kind of one of those books that people read in business. It's like, if you handed this to your mom, would she still have questions after she read it? We have to remember that donors don't work in fundraising or at our organization. So drafting a case should be really clear and layman's terms and direct and detailed.
Yeah, so I really like how you mentioned involving people who will actually fund something. I guess it'd be nice not to not to have to guess as to what will resonate. But I suppose that's also a good segue into talking about a little bit more about the planning stage.
Mm-hmm.
So what does the planning stage of a comprehensive campaign look like to you, Meg?
Planning for a campaign is the most important thing that you can do if you're thinking about going into a campaign, because the organizations who say, oh, I can't afford to plan for this, so we're just going to come up with a goal based around our needs, might be in a campaign for a really long time. We save a lot of money and a lot of time and energy and press by planning for something. That means going out with your case for support to anywhere from 12 to 35 different individual constituents and holding a conversation with them. Most of the time, a firm like someone like myself or a firm like ours will hold these conversations on behalf of an organization so that you can actually find out all of the details that you can from a prospective donor before you really embark on your initiative. I'm going to pause to say that campaigns have a handful of stages here, and each one very much influences the success of the next. The first one is around strategic visioning, which used to, again, years ago, be a year-long process that resulted in a really long plan that was in a binder. Now that can be a very short process that is just tacked onto the front of a planning stage, a campaign planning assessment, where you get your vision all out on the table between the leadership team, the fundraising team, and the board, and you agree on the pillars that are most important to you. That gets put into a case for support, and we go through the planning stage. Ultimately, the planning stage goes into a silent phase of a campaign where we secure about 80% of the funding before we launch it publicly. And once we meet or surpass the goal in a public manner where everyone has the opportunity to give a gift of any size, we then celebrate in our kind of celebration stage where we loop right back around to visioning what we're going to do next. So I wanted you to have that context that I'm thinking right now for campaign planning right in about stage 2. And what we're doing here is we're qualifying people as certain kinds of donors to an organization's campaign. And we're finding out what their philanthropic priorities are, what their family values and priorities are. where they've been involved and what that experience has been like for them. We're finding out what their perception is of your organization. Philanthropic investors very much care about a handful of things. They care about leadership, messaging and marketing. They care about sustainability. They care about strategic vision. They care about knowing that you're really efficient in other community partnerships with your resources. And they always ask about those things. Every sophisticated and successful businesswoman and businessman isn't automatically a sophisticated philanthropist. We are so often teaching people about ways to give and our organizations and why the money is so impactful when we're in conversations with them. And I know that those of you on here have experienced that and can understand it. When you're in the planning stage of a campaign, you have the chance to really understand what they already know and what they think about philanthropy in your organization. And you can gather so much information that at the end of it, you're really sort of handed a roadmap for success. 90% of what you will raise during a campaign will come from less than 10% of your constituents. On all of the campaigns that my firm is working on right now, 95% of what is raised is coming from less than 5% of the constituents. So why do you only have to engage sometimes as few as 15 individuals or families in a planning study? Because they will probably inform a majority of what you can or can't do. And when we are relying, like I shared earlier, on so few people for really such significant gifts, we have to fire on two cylinders. We have to treat those relationships carefully and intentionally and with genuine respect and stewardship. And we also have to be mindful of how we're building out the rest of our pyramid so that we're growing our donor capacity. But the truth is that the planning stage really uncovers what those really critical, really kind of transformational families or individuals will do for your initiative by engaging them right at the onset around your case for support, their philanthropic capacity, and what they think of your organization, so that every single step from there is very intentionally crafted around what they've already shared with you that they care about or don't care about. And we can be like just genuine but strategic relationship builders from there.
So I'm probably still in the old mindset of thinking about some of these things, but and this is sort of like the devil's advocate perspective, but if you're constantly in sort of like the cycle of campaigning, mm-hmm. is it possible to turn donors off by always being in a campaign if that's the way that it's sort of marketed or pitched to them?
I'm glad you're asking that, because board members will say all of the time, we can't go into a campaign. Our donors have fatigue, giving fatigue. They have giving fatigue from being asked to go to your golf tournament, buy a table at your gala, give an auction item for your auction, respond to the fall appeal, and respond to the spring appeal. But when you're in a comprehensive campaign, if I say, Nick, would you and your family consider a gift of $7,500? It's payable over, the next 4-year period of time. I'll send you a pledge reminder and updates on how your money's being used every year. And I can't wait to see you for a cup of coffee and just say thank you instead of ask you for money. You might feel like, hey, this feels pretty good. I know exactly like what the amount I'm asked for. I'm budgeting it for the next handful of years. I'm going to get a reminder. I'm going to get picture updates to my emails. I'm going to get a text from Meg that says, hey, I just ran into your kids at baseball. They're so great. Good to see you. All of a sudden, our relationship went from you feeling like, gosh, another nickel and dime, to feeling like Meg genuinely knows who I am and is thanking me and showing me what my money's doing. So by the time the 3 or 4 year period of time ends, we're kind of back to the beginning where I'm saying, react, Nick, react to me, to this case for support that I put together that kind of doubles our impact of what we're going to do next, which means I'm probably going to ask you for a bigger gift. I'm hoping to, and I want you to be involved again. So really, the organizations who raise the most amount of money in the world are always in a campaign, but they're just really considerate about how they put relationships at the forefront of it.
No, I like that distinction, nickel and diming versus actually trying to build a relationship with someone. I think that's an important distinction for sure.
Mhm. Yep.
Now, another common question we get is about leadership boards, and you mentioned board members before. I'm sure our audience has a range of different experiences with boards and how they function, both good and bad. But it is probably pretty well accepted that it can be a challenge, right, to corral a group of people into having one unified vision. Let's say for a campaign. So, Meg, what do you think is the best approach to getting buy-in from your board?
I think we can also agree that some of the resistance we see from board members around a campaign is this kind of gloomy expectation that we're going to fund a huge part of the campaign. And in my playbook, that is not necessarily the case. Great if it ends up working out that way, but the board as a group is not my top prospect. They're not my best prospects automatically. So when people say to me, I want to go into a campaign, but I don't have a good fundraising board, I'm like, that's great. Your board members are accountants and surgeons and attorneys and wealth managers. They are not professional fundraisers. They are not professional CEOs of nonprofit organizations. I don't really want them to ask for a gift. I hope you ask for the gift. So the first thing I say is take that right off of your chest. If it's really stressful for you to think about your board not asking for money, we don't want them to. What we do want them to do is open up doors that we can walk through. So when I'm thinking about my board and a campaign, I'm saying to them, it's time for us to go through an initiative here where we can fund our vision and our priorities without constantly spinning our wheels around events and mailers and email blasts that just don't have a lot of return, but are burning out our staff. It's a lot of manpower. It's a lot of hours on not a lot of money. The only way right now in this country to raise really big money is through major gifts. It's through carrying a portfolio of people's names who have the capacity to give and systematically going out to have meetings with them and proactively soliciting them for a gift. That means it's a specific amount of money and a specific allocation in most cases for their support. That's how we raise money in a campaign. And that is how we raise money in major gifts, even, otherwise. So to board members, I say, I want you to think about one relationship who fits this kind of profile of someone who might have an affinity for arts, if that's where I work, and has some capacity to give a gift. If you can introduce me, I'm going to take a cup of coffee with them. And I'm going to go so far as to send you an email right now with language that you can use to introduce me so that you can just copy and paste it. Of course, make it your own, but I want this to be easy for you. And I don't even leave it in the board member's control. I literally write them an email and say, hi, John, good to see you at the board meeting this morning. In red below is the language that you can use to introduce me to Sally. Thanks for agreeing to do that. If the board member says, Sally's only meeting with you, Meg, if I'm there, then by all means, John can come and we can have that conversation together. But it's best if we can tell our board at the forefront that the only way we can fuel our vision is through a campaign. So let's, shut the door, get in this conference room and stay here until we agree, at least roughly, on what some of these buckets, these pillars for our campaign could be. The next thing we're going to do is just talk about the relationships who might be able to make this vision actually possible. A plan is only as good as our ability to fund it. Board members know and understand that. So if we can ask them to kind of help us build out that spider web of connectivity, of relationships who might be able to help us move the needle by engaging with us as the professionals at the organization, then they're doing us a ginormous service, right? By introducing us, by opening doors that we walk through ourselves. We do want board members to all give a gift to the campaign, but our goal is typically 100% board participation at their best gift. What I say to board members is, if you sit on my board and we're going into a campaign, I want to be your philanthropic priority. And I want you to pledge your gift over the time of this campaign period. So I know that you are gifting us your greatest possible gift. And I'm so incredibly thankful for that. But I might only have one or two board members who I actually solicit really specifically and proactively, because I know I want to ask them for a $50,000 or a $1 million gift. And to other board members, I say, thank you so much for making us your philanthropic priority. So I would say with boards, it's most important to take the pressure off of them and ensure them that they kind of have this role of working smarter, not harder in campaigns. And that when we have access to their relationships, we can do the heavy lifting around asking.
Yeah, I will just point out that that seems to go against like maybe common wisdom, maybe old wisdom,
Yeah.
that number one, boards make the best askers sometimes, but also you invite people to be on a board because you want that enhanced engagement and you want to ask them for money.
Well,
I guess maybe that's out of date, or maybe it's still only true for certain types of gifts.
no, I think that you bring up a good point around like why you're asking people to come on your board. I think you have different boards during the times of campaign planning and campaign public phases. I mean, boards change, and the campaign planning phase, it should ultimately leave you with a roadmap of exactly what to do to say you can raise this amount of money on this time period. Here's you need another staff member to do this. You got to change a little bit of your marketing and messaging here. Here's the things to do first, second, and third. Here's strategies for your top 5 asks. Like, just to kind of reiterate, that's your roadmap there. That also might say, hey, of the 22 people we interviewed for your feasibility study, 4 of them would make fantastic board members. Don't ask them right this minute, but try over the next 2 months to kind of take their temperature on that so that you can engage them around the idea and bring them on as a class. So the more that we can bring people on in groups of 3, 4, or 5 during times of campaigns, boards really shift and their energy and focus shift too. So I'm asking people to join my board if I know that they have relationships and they won't be shy about introducing me to them. Those are the best campaign board members.
Very good. Yeah. The last question I have is about resources. You know, they're limited, unfortunately. You know, we commonly hear about organizations with limited staff and resources and how difficult it can be for them to prepare for the future, let alone execute a campaign. So what advice would you have for these types of organizations that have those limits?
I know that this feels like the biggest possible limit to engaging in major gifts work and even going into a campaign. I have told you this story, Nick, that I sat on the board for the Syracuse City Ballet, and they had raised, I mean, literally just a few $100s a year and went into this initiative for $1 million. It's just a $1 million campaign. And you know what? It took a lot of time and it took energy, but it exposed them to new relationships that they had no idea were even in their seats at performances, to people who didn't even know they could be in their seats at performances. It actually just put the organization on a new trajectory. And they didn't have a big staff. They had one person who worked development, but we had to use the founder of the ballet really strategically. And I think that's the main thing here is if you're a really small team, then the executive director, the founder, the CEO, whatever your title is at the top there, especially around decision making, you need to be used to engage people at the highest levels, meaningfully, but very strategically. We should always know the next plan, the next action with a relationship, and we should be taking it very deliberately and seriously and using team members to actually just make this kind of relationship building experience as great as possible. So this idea, I'm going to say it again, like work smarter, not harder. With the ballet, they went from raising hundreds of dollars a year to the founder of the ballet going and getting $100,000 commitment from someone who was in the community and went to the Nutcracker every year and couldn't believe he hadn't been asked before. So even with really small teams, it's just about how we spend our time. If you wake up over the next, let's say from now until like December 20th, which is sort of our end of the year bite at the apple here in fundraising, and you think about who before you think about what every day, and you do the same thing when you get back from lunch, you think about who before you think about what, your energy and the money that comes in will change. Because instead of thinking about what the next thing we have to do is for the gala or what the next meeting we have to plan for, we're thinking about who we can ask for a cup of coffee, who we can ask to come for a tour, who we can send a text to with a picture of the kids playing because they supported the playground and say, you know what, it's a gorgeous fall day and I thought of you. I just want to send this to you. Shift your mind and warn your board you're shifting it. Because the truth is that when we shift our minds a little bit, we might be saying to our board, hey, we're going to raise less money this year because we're not doing a gala. We're just not doing it. It's not going to happen. Instead, I'm going to meet with 50 people on an individual basis and try to move every single one of them towards a solicitation. I'm going to ask them for a gift. It's going to be the biggest gift I believe that they can do. I'm going to see how it goes. And that means in years 2 and 3, we're going to raise a lot more money than we were going to raise this year, but we're actually going to raise less for 1 year. So it's also about being brutally honest that there's typically a pinch when we change our mindset and our rhythm and our energy and our approach. But the benefit thereafter is astronomical because now we have all these relationships who are giving to us at such considerable levels. And that can't even be compared to the kind of like transactional giving that we were used to when we were thinking, oh, I have to wear 10 hats today. It's like, what are 3 or 4 hats you can take off today? Either pay somebody part-time, third party to carry them out for you, like an event planner, or just simply let the people around you know they're not going to happen this year because this other more meaningful thing that has far better tracking for revenue is going to be my priority. And we're going to really see the benefit of that after, the first 8 months of work when I can start asking.
Yeah. Meg, thank you, for all these great points. I know you've given us a number of things to think about and maybe apply to different organizations. What we did on this slide is try to take these points and make them into actionable items for our audience. So, if you want to take advantage of trends in philanthropy and use a comprehensive campaign as a tool, here are 4 important action items to remember. You want to go through them for our audience?
Yeah, let's do that. So something really important is dreaming big when you're thinking about a campaign. We've had more clients call us so disappointed that they see a big philanthropist in town give a bigger gift elsewhere. And I'll say, well, your goal was $3 million. So them giving you 300,000 in their eyes is a really big gift towards your goal. Maybe we should have tested a $10 million goal against that person to set their sights higher and really raise the visibility of what you as an organization want to do and actually need to be successful. So dream big. When you're going into a campaign, it's like, let's get this all out on the table right now. Not to say spread our energy a mile wide and an inch deep, but like, what do we really want and really need? Don't assume people's gifts for them. Let them tell you what they're going to do. Let a consultant like me tell you, no, we can't ask him for $1 million, but we can ask him for 500. But I think when we limit our thinking and limit our planning, we're just setting donor sights so much lower than we automatically need to do. And in the past, when you've gotten gifts like the ballet, Syracuse City Ballet, and they've been for $300 and you think there's no way I could ever go into a campaign, that's because the people who gave them the biggest gifts had never even given them $1 before. So just because you've only raised, $300,000 every year for the past 3 years doesn't mean that you can't be really methodical around a great vision, a solid and compelling case for support, and a dozen relationships who might have capacity to give. You might surprise yourself to find out you could raise $3 million just from those people, but you have to be sophisticated and professional and proactive, and you have to ask. We don't know until we ask. So past giving is just not indicative of what our abilities are in the future. The planning process is the number one thing to invest in. If you're going to spend any money, it should be in this process because it will save you so much time and money and energy later on. When people do a feasibility study themselves, or when they skip a feasibility study and go right into a campaign, they're missing the opportunity to really deeply qualify and cultivate the people who can make or break the initiative for them. And I always say, campaign budgets are separate from your operating budget. So don't get hung up on the cost. You can recoup the cost of your campaign from the gifts that actually come in. So pull a little money from a savings account or an endowment, or ask the board to come together and fund a planning study for you, because you're literally going to be handed a roadmap of exactly what you can do and how long it'll take and who needs to do what and where to go first. And there's nothing more powerful and critical to campaign success than just knowing you're organized on what you're going to do and what you can actually accomplish. And then, of course, remember to take advantage of the fact that you can build an endowment during the time of a campaign. They're not reserved for colleges and universities or healthcare systems. These are funds that all nonprofit organizations should have and should be using interest from in order to meet their budgets and to be on a trajectory where they don't have to worry about fundraising on an annual basis. They can worry more about visioning and imagining what's next for them and knowing that they have some support that can't and won't go anywhere that's feeding into their budget to help balance that. And Nick, maybe you had anything else to comment about endowments. I just want to emphasize, like, include them.
Okay. No, I think you hit it. I think it's an endowment is ballast, it's stability for your organization, and investing a little bit of time and effort into building it over time, I think, can pay off hypothetical dividends, conceptual dividends, in addition to literal dividends. So, Meg, that's those are great insights. I think this is a topic that's clearly important to a lot of organizations, and you've given our listeners some really great takeaways. So thank you so much for that. I did want to close by saying that Meg and the George Philanthropy Group are great resources for nonprofits. I know Meg is always interested in learning more about your organization's challenges. So her contact information is on this slide, or you can just go to georgephilanthropy.com to see all the resources they have available. And then also, please reach out to Manning & Napier. I think most of you know that we are investment advisors. We manage assets for individual clients, retirement plans, and nonprofits. And on our website, you can learn more about our strategies and the services that we provide. You can download our latest nonprofit magazine, which we call Impact, or you can join our mailing list and peruse the library of content that we have for the nonprofit space, including webinars like this one. And so we're always trying to pull out useful content, both on the investment side and the fundraising side. So please go out and check out manningnapier.com/signup. Okay, now we're on to questions. There were a few pre-submitted questions. As a reminder, you can submit questions through Zoom's question dialog box, so feel free to do that now. But there were a few pre-submitted questions when you signed up. So I think we'll start with those while we give people a chance to type them in. So Meg, here's a good question. So okay. Do I have to go into a campaign to ask for a big gift?
Typically, yes. And the reason is because, Nick, if you ask me for $2,000 for your kids' library program and I say yes, and then next year you say, Meg, it's going so well, like that we did all the things that we told you we wanted to do, and we're so grateful for your generosity. And then you say, Meg, would you give us $10,000 this year? I'm like, I think I'm going to stick with the $2,000 if it went well and it's working. And I hope you'll continue to ask other people for gifts like mine at the same level as well. And so you see, when we're not in a campaign, it's a little tricky to increase people's giving. Of course, we can incrementally, and I think that's fair and somewhat expected. But to try and jump from $500 to $25,000, which is actually a completely typical kind of jump that we see from annual gifts to a campaign, if the person has capacity. In a campaign, we can create a sense of urgency. We can show them that we've put a ton of energy into articulating what our vision is. We're not just being, wishy-washy. We're not being general, and we're not just kind of throwing things out into the air. And we can also stretch gifts over a period of time. So someone who has the capacity to give you $5,000, if they did it for 5 years, that's a $25,000 gift. And so you kind of do need to package your vision into a campaign in order to solicit a major or principal gift. And because someone typed this and it very much has to do with what I'm saying, I'm just gonna Lisa had written, is there a certain time frame to run a comprehensive campaign? There's not like a specific time frame you have to stick to. I would say a lot of campaigns are about 3 years long, but there are many campaigns that run about 4 or 5 years time. And for gifts that we think about doing that math I just did, that is like a $25,000 kind of gift. We are multiplying a gift by 5, right? So I think it's fair to say that campaign commitments usually span 3 years or 5 years time, and that you would not embark on a campaign that was just less than a couple of years. You typically need at least 5 months for a planning phase, maybe tack on a month or 2 for visioning before that. And a lot of silent phases end up being anywhere from 12, 13 to 18, 19 kind of months. Certainly at a bigger organization, that might be a couple of years. And then a public phase anywhere from 12 to 18 months too. So you can see how you can span anywhere from 2.5, 3 years to up to 5 years there.
And I think there's just one more question, and it
Okay.
says marketing. What do we need from a marketing perspective to promote a campaign?
It varies based on your organization and what resonates with your constituents. People, you do need typically some kind of printed high-end leave behind that like really organizes exactly what your vision is and your key priorities and your goals, especially so you can also include things in there like campaign leadership or naming and recognition kind of opportunities. I think it legitimizes things and it offers this professionalism that people can review with a spouse, maybe after your visit. You need a landing page so that people can give online to like a really well organized, campaign kind of site. And I really love videos. I really love that short where you can pull like 20-second clips, but maybe the video itself is 1 minute or 90 seconds at most that you can play at cocktail parties and at an event for a public launch. You can share it with the news. You can put it on social media. I think video in our kind of Instagram reel, TikTok crazed world is a really great way to capture people's attention. And you don't need to spend a ton of money. Again, as a side note, marketing costs are also recouped from gifts. So you can expect to spend anywhere from 2 or 3% up to 14-ish% of your goal on campaign costs. And it's best practice just to make a separate budget and pull from gifts to pay for these kinds of things. So a really small goal usually has higher percentage costs, and a big goal, those cost percentage goes down.
Okay. Yeah, there's no other questions. So
okay, we made it
great.
A minute early.
A minute early. This is great information, Meg. Thank you so much. On behalf of our audience, thank you. And from both of us, thank you for our audience for tuning in and learning a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Nick. And thank you everyone for joining.
Have a great day, everyone.